Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
All right, hey, good morning, everybody. Here he is. All right, welcome. It's, I guess, time to go. Me and my printer, I guess, have decided to go off at the same time here. It is Thursday, August 19th, 2021. I'm printing something. You probably don't need to know about it, but maybe you do because you hear it in the background. I don't know. Maybe you don't. Maybe it's just regular background noise to you. But I assure you that the show will be more than that. At least I think so. Greg Dworkin has been collecting a raft of those stories as usual, and they are about ready to roll out. I haven't had as close an eye on the Twitter noise this morning as I usually do. A little bit distracted and poking around elsewhere. But I am positive that between the two of us, we can manage to bring you a pretty decent roundup of the news. Boy, yeah, I don't know. I don't realize how disconnected I feel if I go and take care of some other business in the morning. That has something to do with the printing that was going on. I don't know. At some point, I realized today on August 19th that I had forgotten to take care of some business that was due to be paid up by July 31st. And I said, so now, of course, late fee and all that junk. You've probably been there once or twice. And then, and now that I've paid it, I need to print myself a receipt that proves that I did pay it, and that came at about 9 o'clock. So that's where we are today. Big news as far as, what's going on out there today. It looks like a major part of Greg's morning roundup is going to have to be dedicated. Once again, a year and a half, almost 2 years into this thing, the COVID-19 pandemic, because I guess people just haven't gotten the message at some point. Although I've been talking to you a couple of days in a row now about and even from before the break, the rash of stories in the big major daily newspapers and probably every local newspaper as well. The new hot story is to talk to people who are hospitalized and perhaps even facing death from COVID, having deathbed conversions in some cases, but not all, about the value of the vaccine. And another big story just yesterday, I think Washington Post printing another one, and I guess it got circulated all over the country that a set of parents, both parents caught the virus and both died within weeks of one another, leaving 4 kids behind. So tugging at the heartstrings with that one, and you got to feel bad for the kids. And it was just, but more of the same, that their deathbed wish was make sure my children get the vaccine, which was really your job, of course. But I understand, you can't take care of it now, and maybe we'll be able to take care of it for you. But it's getting to the saturation point. And it occurred to me yesterday that, interviews in hospital COVID ICU wards are the new interviews in Midwestern heartland diners where we got to talk to Trump voters and see if they've changed their mind. I guess the good news here is that most of these interviews evidence a change of mind for these people. Although for months we've been reading the stories of people who denied everything right up until their last breath, who just insisted that it was something other than COVID, which was a hoax, which was killing them. So, I don't know. I guess the big change here is that they found people who were willing to say, yeah, I believe it now. So, I don't know. I guess that's something. So, we'll see how things are going here. This is probably the third or fourth day. I guess it'll be the third day this week that Greg has mentioned, or he hasn't mentioned it yet, but I see it's in his notes, that there's hope out there that we might be seeing a peak at last, and maybe getting over the peak of this, I guess, 4th wave now, including thanks to the Delta variant. I guess Greg will be here to tell you all about that now. And, of course, the worry about calling it a peak is in the next week or two, all over the country, we're going to send thousands and thousands and thousands of kids back to school. And does that Do we say, wow, great timing because we're past the peak, or does this bring us to another peak? I guess we have yet to find out. But that's the other hot story around the country, is the number of school districts that went back to school, especially in states where governors purported to have banned localities from imposing their own mask mandates, and lots of stories about those too. I've got a couple of those parked away myself. And then immediately finding within 4 days or so of returning to school that thousands upon thousands of their kids are now not sick, but in quarantine because they've been exposed. Which means, of course, that those schools are effectively closed. The localities said, politically speaking, we will open, and we will open without masks, and we will open in defiance of COVID-19. And once again, the lesson that Greg told us we would learn with this virus and every other virus that we seek to battle this way, virus will not negotiate with you. The virus is not interested in the politics of your reopening. There is no bargaining with it. If it's there, it will get you. And if you think you can open despite it, you can't. It will close you. The decision you made is moot. The decision the virus made, we're going to get your kids and we're going to close your schools, was never in doubt. But yet here we are. And here's Greg. So good morning, Greg. Thanks for teaching us so well about this thing.
Good morning. You know, basically the situation with COVID sucks right now. That's your abbreviated pundit roundup.
Well, thank you.
And, you know, part of the reason is people who refuse to do what they're supposed to do. But there's a fascinating discussion to be had about the approach that people are taking. And I think that, you know, we have to at least touch base on a couple of those. I started by sending David this morning a bunch of graphs, which you can't see real well on a podcast, but I can tell you about.
Look closer.
And it's CDC tracking hospitalizations for children. And it remains worrisome, especially in Region 4. I sent David also Virginia, and Connecticut just I looked at myself, and we're not doing so bad in this regard. But in Region 4, which is the southeast, and that includes Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, states like that, there's a huge spike, double, triple the number of pediatric hospitalizations compared to January.
Yeah, when kids didn't get it.
And that's bad. And so the idea that, you know, kids can't get it is silly, because kids can get it, they are getting it, and they're winding up in the hospital. Now, they're not dying, but because of their age, a lot of them aren't vaccinated. And because of their states, that is to say Region 4, Mississippi, Alabama, a lot of them aren't vaccinated, even if they could be, because they're over 12.
Yeah.
So the number of cases is rising overall, and you cannot separate schools from their community.
Yeah, the idea was not to originally.
Well, so, you know, a couple of things about that. You know, particularly Alabama and Georgia are having huge spikes, which are very worrisome because pediatric facilities are limited. Pediatrics isn't small adult medicine. You can't take adult nurses, adult physicians and say, okay, now take care of the kids. They freak. They're not qualified. They know that. And they're afraid of the kids. And so you can't just open up extra beds by co-opting an adult unit, which you don't have anyway because that's filled with adult COVID patients.
Oh, sure.
But if it were empty, you still can't increase pediatric beds with the snap of your finger. It just doesn't work that way. So with the limited facilities you have, you then start transferring patients, and, you know, you often wind up starting to transfer patients out of state. And because of what's going on in Region 4, out of region. And so this is like a really big deal. And what happens to the parents, and how do they go visit when the kid is like 1,500 miles away? So, you know, this is all a huge problem when it comes to that. Now, cases normalized by population, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida are the top three, with Mississippi on top. Louisiana may be peaking. Florida is unclear because their data is just so screwy.
Okay.
But, you know, because of all of this going on, you get stories like what's in the Daily Beast today. Texas siblings orphaned after both parents die from COVID-19.
Yeah, there you go. That's
so even an adult problem is a pediatric problem.
True, right. Well, when it becomes, you know, enough of a problem that they
anyway.
die, yeah.
Right. So this JAMA Network article struck me. My friend Megan Ranney, MD, sent this to me. It's to everybody on Twitter.
Okay.
Child health policy in the COVID-19 pandemic. And they talk about the origins of pediatrics, including the father of pediatrics, as they call it. He must have been very prolific, Abraham Jacobi, who was also chief pediatrician at Mount Sinai Hospital, where I trained, so I know the name well. A lot of pavilions named after him. But the idea is avoiding unnecessary risk of serious harm to children, even small risks. That's a key goal of regulatory policy. And that's why you see, two walkers fell down the stairs. We're going to ban walkers.
Oh.
One kid got his head caught in between the bars of a crib. That crib's being taken off the market.
That happens.
Oh, we got 330 million people. How do you do that when only one? Because, you're trying to protect the kids. And if it can happen once, it can happen often. And the denominator doesn't matter. I don't care how many kids there are in the country. That was a pediatric death that was preventable. The numerator is what matters here.
That's usually the case, when it's a consumer product.
Right? So, as this article points out, there are times when child health policy must assert itself against the self-interested demands of adults. During the pandemic, these demands included keeping the bars and restaurants open, even during periods of high transmission, community transmission, I would add. In the face of a surge in cases from Delta, many adults, including some political leaders, are resisting the universal use of masks in schools and pushing for a return to an economic and social normalcy despite the risks to health. So at the time, we should have kept the schools open and closed the bars. Instead, we kept the bars open and closed the schools because adults make policy, not pediatricians.
That was kind of dumb.
Child health policy leaders should respond not so fast. Children and families are suffering devastating losses in the COVID era with record amounts of learning loss, hunger, economic instability. Children deserve not only the deployment of safe and effective vaccines, but also major investments in education, nutrition, housing, and, as per that Texas story from the Daily Beast, preservation of their parents.
Yeah. Won't someone please think of the children?
Yeah, by thinking of the parents. Here's one from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, again to reemphasize the point. Georgia hospitals stretched with influx of kids battling COVID and other viruses because we all wore masks and were pretty good about preventing RSV, respiratory syncytial virus, this winter. It hit the summer. Oh. So it's taking beds, and puts little kids in the hospital with a wheezing asthma-like illness, which is an asthma. It's a respiratory virus, wheezing-associated virus infection. And so you have to be in the hospital for monitoring oxygen and support. The soaring number of children contracting COVID-19 is straining Georgia's pediatric healthcare system. Again, you can't expand the pediatric healthcare system very easily, unlike the adult side where you can double the number of beds. And you can even find people from other states that easily come in and take care of them. Not so easy with kids. More kids than ever before are suffering from coronavirus cases so severe they need to be hospitalized, filling pediatric wards at a time when physicians are also contending with an unseasonable surge of other respiratory viruses. Many area children's hospitals are reporting that more than 3/4 of the ICU beds are occupied. In some places it's closer to 90. And remember, this also means if your kid gets in a car accident, there's no room for them.
Yeah.
While ER doctors and pediatric specialists interviewed this week say they're able to keep up with cases for now in Georgia, many fear what could come in the weeks ahead as the Delta variant tears across the region and schools continue in-person, often mask-optional learning. We haven't reached that critical moment yet when we're unable to provide the care. We're doing everything we can to stay just ahead of that, said James Black, Medical Director of Emergency Services at Albany's Phoebe Putney Memorial Hospital. This is in Georgia. Albany, Georgia. We're doing everything we can to stay just ahead of that, but it's a race that most of us are losing. And again, the whole point of prevention is so you don't get to the point where you're doing emergency triage. So look, there's still a bed. What are you worried about?
One bed,
well,
at least.
We're worried about schools. Why don't you mask and do what you need to do in schools and get yourself vaccinated so we don't reach that point? That's prevention. Well, you're just an alarmist because we still have that bed.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I guess you could just keep putting a bed there, but it won't help you much. Yeah, we all forgot the flatten the curve thing. It's too long ago.
It's still true, and it's especially true now for pediatrics, which can't expand so well. So how is that campaign against public health going? Well, Aaron Blake has in the Washington Post today, coronavirus mandates polling. 69% favor school mask mandate, 65% favor vaccine mandate for medical providers, 61% favor vaccine mandate for teachers, 77% oppose withholding funding from schools and local governments over mask mandates, analysis, they say the GOP is losing the PR battle on coronavirus mandates, which is one of the reasons why Biden keeps yelling at DeSantis. That's politics, but it's good politics.
Yeah, I mean, all those measures passed the old Hastert test before we found out he was a pervert. But the test was an interesting one. 60% plus support among the public will tell you something usually. But I don't know. They seem dedicated to fighting against it. So
yeah, here's a couple from the Miami Herald, which I subscribe to, and I have ever since Julie K. Brown started writing about Jeffrey Epstein. Support your local paper and others if you can.
Congratulations.
Biden
Julie.
threatens legal action on masks in schools as feud with DeSantis intensifies.
Yes.
President Joe Biden on Wednesday said his administration is prepared to take possible legal action against governors who try to prevent local school officials from imposing universal mask mandates. And a parallel sister story here in the Miami Herald. Miami-Dade School Board makes mask mandatory, joining Broward in opposing state order. So all of South Florida basically is revolting.
Well. And
I don't care how revolting it is. The point is they're defying the government.
Right, exactly. Yeah, it's really something. In addition to, or I guess a part of the story of Biden threatening legal action is, I guess, the Department of Education is thinking of intervening with its civil rights division, basically saying that there might be a federal case against some of these governors' orders that the orders violate the civil rights of kids trying to return to school, particularly those with various special needs and medical issues who could otherwise safely return to school but now can't because of the orders. Interesting. Very creative, and it was a great idea for them to be activist in trying to get the federal government in there to try to do something, to try to give some of these localities hope as they fight against their idiot governors.
Right.
So
this is all going on, and it's important. I think
it is. Oh, sure, absolutely. It's the top story, as a matter of fact.
Right. So Ben Montgomery, who is walks, talks, he says. Get the Axios Tampa Bay newsletter. So maybe he's associated with Axios. Who knows? He writes that yesterday's school board meeting in Tampa, a pediatric nurse called it a pandemic of sincere ignorance, and I can't stop thinking about that line.
Yeah, well, we've been looking for a new pandemic of something. The unvaccinated thing didn't satisfy you, but how about that one?
Right. Meanwhile, Susan Demis and our friends in Michigan Advance, write, Biden mandates vaccines in nursing homes, admonishes GOP governors on school masks. So he's making it a political issue and saying nursing home people should be vaccinated, and we're going to cut off Medicare and Medicaid from anybody who isn't. So the Medicaid part hits a lot of kids, but also some adults. And the Medicare part, obviously, is seniors. And so, this is a big deal for nursing homes, and so they're going to be in the situation where, okay, it's time. You guys really need to mandate this stuff.
Right.
This is Mississippi Free Press, again, part of Region 4. Collective failure. Health leaders call for social responsibility at a second field hospital. This is a Samaritan's Purse field hospital. They set them up in New York City back in the day, and they're still setting them up where needed. Dr. Luann Woodward had a stark message for Mississippi as she stood in front of the second field hospital opened in a week to treat COVID-19 patients in the University of Mississippi Medical Center in the capital city. We as a state, as a collective, have failed to respond in a unified way to a common threat. We failed to use the tools we have to protect ourselves, our families, our children, and our state. Now, our states, Virginia, we love people in Virginia, and Connecticut, we love people in Connecticut too, are doing a little better in regard to pediatric cases and regard in general to Region 4, but it's everywhere. And so, people travel. Connecticut is completely held hostage to New York and Massachusetts in terms of how it does. If those states spike, we spike. Nothing we can do about it. People, travel right through us to get from one to the other. Sometimes they even stop here, but usually they're on their way. So
keep moving.
Yeah, keep moving. We have an effective and available, safe and free vaccine we're not using to its fullest capacity. Mississippi is the most undervaccinated state in the country.
Is it?
This is where we are. A refrain heard across the state from Woodward, from State Health Officer Thomas Dobbs, who had the most amazing picture. I suppose I should find it and send it to you so all of our podcast people can see it.
Yeah.
But Thomas Dobbs the state health officer in Mississippi
Yeah.
is wearing a mask.
That is amazing.
And he's just behind Tate Reeves' shoulder, the governor,
That is also amazing.
who's not wearing a mask.
Right.
And Tate Reeves starts yelling at a reporter, "Why are you wearing that mask? You don't need that mask," with Dobbs behind him mask. And the look that you could see from Dobbs' haunted,
That's right.
hostage-taking eyes
Taken, yeah. Oh my gosh.
is just
that's
remarkable.
Right. You mentioned that photo. I would like to see that one.
Yeah, I'll find it later.
Okay,
I mean,
you can tweet it
for those of
around.
you who are listening, wherever it's posted, Daily Kos, where Scott Anderson puts the summary, we'll put that picture. But it's amazing. Today,
Yeah,
another
right.
staggering caseload, 4,085, the third highest of all time. More Mississippians today are in the hospital with COVID than ever before. Over a fourth of that number occupy ICUs. More than 300 Mississippians are on ventilators. The former peak in winter recedes with every passing day.
I'll tell you.
So
quite a
Samaritan's
lesson.
Purse is there. They're also
Okay.
in Haiti. They could be
Oh.
putting more in Haiti, but they can't because they're there.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, resources are finite.
That's true.
And
So
they
you're
promise
eating
not
up-
to proselytize the patients. And, issues, but, medical care is not to be overlooked. And I don't think Mississippi's going to have a problem with it.
All right.
New York didn't have a problem with it. I mean, they noted who they were,
Yeah.
but said thank you for the help.
Mississippi, an interesting case, and I guess certainly like everything that we've learned about pandemics in general from you, and basically everything we've learned from you, where wait and see is an extremely important factor in all this. I note for the record, because of Mississippi's situation, you said they're the least or the most under-vaccinated state, and it's beginning to reflect that in the statistics. But the wait and see part, I in my nightly compilation of all the statistics, I will now note for the record that among the northeastern states that were at first pummeled with the first wave of coronavirus in this country and have stayed atop the list of the number of people killed by the virus per million in population, New York
Because
and
of
New
that early
Jersey.
spike.
Yeah, New York and New Jersey have remained on top of that list. But New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts were all 1, 2, 3, 4 for a long time, followed up quickly by Rhode Island. So all northeastern and mid-Atlantic states. Mississippi yesterday passed Massachusetts in deaths per capita, essentially, becoming the third ranking state behind New York and New Jersey, and was pointed out to me last night as those numbers were up. And I also note each night the rate of increase from day to day, that within 2 to 3 weeks you could be looking at Mississippi passing New York and coming in just behind. Only New Jersey would exceed them in deaths per million. So back when Jared Kushner in his wisdom said, well, let's do nothing, or even worse, just do, the wrong thing in the face of COVID, because it's just the blue states that are going to get it. You look at my map every night of top 10 in new cases daily, it's all a lock on the solid South. It's never left there for the last 3 months, and it's getting worse and worse each day. And now you're seeing Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama creeping up in those numbers, replacing those northeastern states. A year and a half into this, they now take their place at the top of the list where they never thought they would be. And it was okay, because
And never
it was just
should
going to
be.
be
And
blue
the difference,
states.
of course, is that then we didn't know, and now
Yeah.
we do, and yet
Now we
here
can
it
do
is,
something
the,
about it.
Pandemic of
Exactly.
of ignorance.
When there was nothing to do about it, New York and New Jersey ended up at the top. When there was something that could be done about it for free to all of the people in those states, they
They did it.
decided not to do it, and now they're at the top of the list.
Of course, there's still pockets of we still have work to do without question, and so none of us are free from this. And everybody's interconnected. I don't want you to get the feeling that pediatricians are cynical, but having practiced pediatric medicine, hospital medicine in Manhattan and Connecticut, we used to say that what happens is people in Manhattan would go to New Jersey to drown, but people in the Bronx would come up to Connecticut to drown, because that's just what the traffic patterns are and where the roads go.
I see.
And where the roads go is where people go. And so the idea that somehow these states are divorced from each other,
Yeah, well, that won't happen.
or that there's a wall at the border, it's as silly as there's a wall
much
at
as you might wish for it.
northern Canada, southern Canada, or northern Mexico, that somehow or other is going to change everything. It's not how things work, and it's not how people work. So again, as long as people travel between New York and Boston, and they do, Connecticut's going to not
Baseball
be
games.
disease-free. And that's an important concept because then you have to look at the international picture. And this story is from Israel. As Israel's COVID war reaches critical stage, Naftali Bennett, the new prime minister, has many dilemmas but few answers. Israel is elected for a third shot. They're not sure any more than we're sure that that's a good idea, but they're doing it anyway. And then they have their own, administration issues that they have to deal with. And is it going to affect a lockdown? And the difference, of course, is Israel used to basically have a administrative dictatorship. For all practical purposes, everything went through Netanyahu. But in Bennett's situation, it's going back to the parliamentary. Every cabinet has its own issue that they're assigned to. And so it's just not the same system, and we'll have to see how that works out. But Greg Gonzalez makes the point, which I think is an excellent one. Remember, he's an early AIDS activist who's now an epidemiologist at Yale. The point is that those of us who are vaccinated are at far, far less risk of serious disease and death than the billions of unvaccinated people around the world. Think of the trade-off we're making as we give boosters out to all who want them in the U.S., while, the rest of what he left off is, well, the rest of the world really can't get what they need. Yeah. So we'll talk more about that after the break, which should be about now.
Yes.
I'm waiting for the music. Should be any moment.
10 seconds.
10 seconds.
9 seconds.
But, the whole issue of boosters for us isn't a simple one.
Right.
It might be the right answer. I can understand why they're doing it, but I think we need a little more explaining about that, which we're going to do after the break.
Yes, and there was some announcement, I guess, from the administration yesterday that I guess they're planning at least to go forward with it. I guess they could turn around, but I think September 20th is the date they set for the first round of boosters to become available for the very first of those.
Yeah, if you're 8
vaccinated
months
in the
out,
US.
then September 20th you can get it, unless you're Greg Abbott, in which case you've already got it.
Yes, right, jumping the line once again.
But his office said they're not familiar with the fact that he is. He did just because he said so.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us. We're still talking about the pandemic because the pandemic is still going on. You would think this would have been over by now, but no, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I think it is important to cover. And, frankly, watching the collective temper tantrum that the media is doing over Afghanistan, Biden is defensive because he's defiant. He's defying us.
Yeah, that's who he's defying.
I'm just not that interested. This is where you turn cable off and say, get over it. I'll watch you in a couple of weeks.
All right.
So we'll get to that. Jeremy Faust, who's an ER physician at Brigham and Women's, good one, says, I had a chance to get a booster shot recently. I passed. Tomorrow, I'll tell you why. And tomorrow is today.
All right.
So he could tell you. Basically, he's skeptical of boosters. I don't care what my antibody levels are if they'll keep me out of the hospital. His basic concern is he's still unsure of what the side effects will be. Not that the vaccines aren't safe, but if you're doing a third one, he would prefer that you nail down what's the deal with myocarditis in kids.
Okay.
Get that data first, because what's the rush? Okay, and I think that may or may not make sense to you or resonate with you, but let's put this in context. Remember, we're talking about the analogy of the virus, which is a respiratory airborne virus. Somebody sneezes, gets in your nose and mouth, and then gets to your lungs, and if it gets to your lungs, it makes you sick. Yes. So this vaccine that you get doesn't keep it out of your nose and mouth, but it gets in your lungs a lot less, maybe not at all, if you get your vaccine. Whichever vaccine, doesn't matter whether it's J or J, mRNA or whatever. Mm-hmm. So getting the vaccine makes it so you don't go to the hospital or wind up in the ICU or dying, for the most part, with some breakthrough. Rare. Because most of the people in the hospital are unvaccinated. And therefore, the bigger issue, of course, is to try to get to the vaccinated. We knew that going in.
Okay.
So yesterday, CDC and NIH present data showing that over time, it appears, and I think that's an important word, appears that your antibody levels, your protective antibody levels, drop a little bit.
All right.
Over time, maybe. And if they do, and you get a third booster, your antibodies go up times 10, if not more.
Okay.
And there's a correlation between those antibodies and protection.
Yes.
Especially against getting the virus in your nose and mouth.
Oh. Well, good. If something can do that.
Maybe good. See, that's the thing.
Maybe good.
The whole presentation yesterday is that if you get your third shot, you might be less likely to get the infection. But if you don't get your booster, you're still protected. Your lungs are still protected against winding up in the hospital or dying.
Okay.
Therefore, is it worth it to get a third shot to boost your ability to not get infected? And people will listen to that and say, well, sure. But the epidemiologists and the doctors are saying, not so fast. Are you saying that we should take this booster, which is in short supply, give it to you and not the rest of the world, because you don't want to get infected because you don't want to wear a mask and you want to go out the bars? Is that what we're doing here?
That could be my motivation. On the other hand,
it is your motivation.
Well,
it's the motivation of most people, because when the epidemiologists started saying not so fast here, it's not clear that the booster is needed at this time, because the data showing that hospitalization and deaths doesn't change all that much. The non-physicians are saying, so you're saying I have to wear this mask and stay home forever? The hell with that. I want my booster.
Yeah, well, I was wondering whether, I guess it's an equilibrium, and someone can work out a formula at which it makes more sense. But I was wondering if you lived in a highly vaccinated area where Delta, still lingered or was taking hold, because, you won't go to the hospital and you won't die from an infection, but there's still so much of this stuff circulating, and even vaccinated people are passing it on. What if we got that third booster out there and fewer people were capable of even passing it on?
That's the plus. Yeah. And that's why they did it. And that's essentially what they presented yesterday.
All right.
And the epidemiologists and the public health people who were terrible at this, that is to say, understanding, great, explaining, terrible,
all right,
trying to say, look, at the individual level, I get it. But at the national level, you're talking about children who, for example, are least likely to benefit from the vaccines, in the sense that, they have the lowest level of going into the hospital, but they have the side effect of that myocarditis. So almost all pediatric cases and a majority of adult ones have been mild when they get the myocarditis. But what if you get a third dose? Do we know the data for safety? Is it worse the third time?
Okay.
The rates skyrocket. Do we know this? And if we don't know this, and you're not winding up in the hospital, are you sure this is the rate we want to go? Why don't you close the bars? Why don't you use the rest of your masking? Why don't the non-vaccinated in Mississippi get vaccinated to stop putting pressure on the hospital? Isn't that smarter? And by the way, if you take those extra doses, instead of giving it to you and give it to Africa and give it to South America, there won't be an epsilon and a tau and an omega. And so ultimately, it's actually in your best interest. And that's really the better way to go. And America is saying, yeah, I want my vaccine because I want to stop thinking about this. And the epidemiologists are saying it's complicated. You can't just stop thinking about this. America likes to say, okay, I got my third vaccine. I'm done. We did that with second. And that's why Region 4 looks the way it does right now.
I guess. Yeah.
So it's not so simple. And we really have to do this as a whole and explain everything. And then after you understand everything, then we can make a cost benefit analysis. Yeah. Well, CDC never does cost benefit. Well, we're trying to, and you don't want to hear it.
Yeah, the cost might be to you. So.
The cost is to you. The benefit is to society. So don't give me this nonsense about we don't do cost benefit.
Now I don't
you
want
don't
to hear
do
it.
cost benefit.
Yeah.
You only do
Please
benefit.
Stop. Well, that's
my
a
rant
tough.
for this morning.
That's a tough one, and
it is a tough one. It's not a simple issue. And what's so interesting about this is that the Biden administration, just like in Afghanistan, whether they made the correct decision or not, tackled a really complex issue and actually made a decision.
Okay. Yeah.
Now they have to defend it.
Yeah.
Not always so easy. But that's what they did. And so that's why, there's another aspect to this. Peter Hotez is very good at explaining this. Here's another trade-off you have that people don't explain. Okay? It looks like if you look at your Worldometer data, and you compare the UK to the United States, for the sake of argument.
I will do that, yes.
Okay. So look at the UK in terms of the number of deaths compared to the US.
You mean per capita or?
Yeah, per capita.
Okay, let's see. We can do that. Deaths
You can do that as we speak.
Yeah, let's see. US and UK. We're right next to one another. As a matter of fact, almost identical at the moment. U.S. posting 1,925 deaths per million and 1,922 in the U.K., number 20 and 21 in the world.
Yeah, and how do the curves look relative to each other?
Let's see. Okay, let's now look at the curves. Just the deaths. Do we have a death? Let's see the death curve. So for the U.S., daily new cases, active cases, deaths. All right.
Look at their daily deaths, for example.
All right.
Or total deaths.
A total? Okay.
Yeah, either one. If you look at total or daily, you find that the UK peaked in February, and then it's only gone up a little bit since then.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, all right. I'm looking at the U.S. first, because USA, number one. Woo! Now I'll look at the UK, because they're at least number two, in my view. Okay, UK, the chart reset on me. Total cases, active cases, deaths. Oh, well, interesting. Yeah.
So
right.
the deaths are going up faster in the U.S. than they are in the UK.
Yes, that is clearly the case.
That is clearly the case, yes?
Yes, and the deaths they've been increasing of late in the United States, slower rate than earlier in the pandemic, but the UK has, even in the total deaths chart, has been relatively flat since February.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Now,
yes. All right.
One big difference between the U.S. and the UK is that the U.S. had your Pfizer Moderna 3 weeks apart. 4 weeks apart from Moderna. 3 weeks for Pfizer, 4 weeks from Moderna.
Something like that, yeah.
J&J has only a tiny fraction of vaccines in the U.S. For various and sundry reasons, so we don't have to look at that at the moment.
Okay.
Now, the UK was doing AstraZeneca, but they also had the mRNA vaccines.
All right.
And their spacing was different. They actually spaced it out more like 12 weeks.
Oh. And so,
like get your first and then, a couple months later get your second.
Yeah.
And the question there is, okay, well, does that matter? And looking at those charts, Peter Hotez looked at that and said, well, maybe it does. Because here's the deal. If you get your mRNA and then 3 weeks later get your next mRNA, you're going to have a big spike of antibody, and that's good because we have so many problems right now. Get it in, get everybody antibody up so we can at least flatten the curve and help protect the hospitals.
Right.
But what about long term? Is it better long term to space it out? Because getting them together, what happens if you get a vaccine and then tomorrow you get another vaccine? Forget about 3 weeks. What about if you get a vaccine and then tomorrow you get your next
I wondered about that.
Moderna? What does that mean? It means like you're only getting one vaccine.
Okay.
If you put them too close together, your series of two is actually more like one. If that's the case, follow the logic here, then naturally you're going to need another booster a year down the line.
Yeah.
And that was known and figured into the process of how people got their vaccines when they were trying to decide, well, how many weeks apart does it need to be? What's the minimum number of weeks apart it can be so that we get a good enough response so that we're happy with it?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're wasting the vaccine by doing it 2 days later.
Yes. Okay, so that's how they came up with the 3 and
So that's
4
how they
weeks.
came up with the 3 to 4 weeks. But had they done 12, it would have been
Nobody told
slower
me.
to get the country vaccinated.
Hmm.
But maybe the effects would be lasting longer. We didn't know that totally at the time, and that certainly wasn't discussed at the time, although
No,
it
I don't
probably
recall it.
was by the people trying to figure out the dosing interval. That's what they do when they try to figure out these
I
things,
assume they thought about it, yeah.
right? And so they did a little bit because, we were warned at the time. It may be that in a year you might need a booster.
Right.
That was discussed at that time, and that's why.
Yeah.
And so when you're looking at this now, you say, okay, well, based on that logic, okay, well, we're going to wind up needing a booster. And so the federal government gets together, and Fauci and Walensky and everybody says, look at those antibodies. They go down over time. They go up when you get a booster. We knew that if you got your vaccines 3 weeks apart, 4 weeks apart, you might need a booster. Looks like it's time to get a booster. We're having another wave. So let's vaccinate the most vulnerable, who might not have had a great antibody response in the first place, the immunosuppressed, the very elderly, over 80, nursing homes. And if we're going to do that, hell, we got enough vaccine. Why don't we just do everybody?
I guess,
Based on
a lot of
8
people
months, and
forget-
then it wanes.
foregoing.
Actually, Eric Topol says, you know what, it wanes at 6 months. Why didn't we pick 6 months? And other people look at the data and say, wait a minute, depending upon how you hold it up to the light, maybe it doesn't wane at all.
Oh,
Maybe it's waning mostly in the under 65s, and the over 65s are stable. And that may be because it has nothing to do with the vaccine whatsoever, or even Delta. It may be that the under 65s are those people who insist that they want to go to the bar and not close the school. So maybe it's all social interaction we're looking at here. And why are you making the country take a vaccine when it's social?
yeah.
Which gets back to our original discussion about this is complicated,
Right.
Because a lot of the people who are pushing the booster are the ones who don't want to wear a mask and want to go out to bars.
Yeah. Well, man.
Right? Does that make sense? So
It does.
you
I
take
think
a look
so.
at this and say, this is not a simple situation here.
No.
And nobody's explaining the whole big picture, but it's all wrapped up. And so we got to make some decisions as a society at a time that we're not capable of making decisions as a society. So we're not Israel. We're not Netanyahu, but Biden's going to do what he needs to do, make a decision and say, okay, this is the way we're going to do it. And there's going to be some flaws in that decision. But I take full responsibility. This is the way it's going to be.
Okay.
That's my read of the situation right now.
Wow. Well, I'm thinking about what it was like at the time that even when I was getting the vaccine, which was, not the earliest wave of vaccines, but we, as soon as we could get it, we had signed up. So I don't know, I guess April, we ended up getting our vaccine, and there wasn't any of this discussion yet, as you mentioned. But the feeling that I got certainly was, no one told me that this was the case or anything, but I guess I got the notion that because they were very tight on controlling the scheduling of that second follow-up booster, that I got the feeling like, oh, the real problem is if you're late in getting in to get it. Like, it has to be within...
You better
X
get it right
number.
now,
Yeah.
otherwise it might not work. Actually, the
Right.
opposite.
It actually felt that way. No one said it. That's true.
Nobody said it.
But I absolutely felt like, oh, well, if I'm supposed to wait 3 weeks, but if I can't make it that day, well, don't wait till 4 weeks, because then the whole thing has, becomes undone and you got to do it all over again. No one said anything like it, but that was definitely the feeling. Whereas, as it turns out, well, you know what? Why don't you wait until 12 weeks? Like, no, if anyone had suggested that, I would have said, are you making that up? What are you talking about?
No, they would have said, well, it's a different vaccine and we don't know, so we're going to go with the data that was submitted. Don't forget, this
3
is an
weeks.
emergency use authorization,
Wow,
an
true.
EUA. The vaccine is not fully approved by the FDA, so you better do it the way the package insert says, because we just don't know.
Yeah, I guess that's what drove it. But how interesting that it turns out that you were actually better off if the interval was longer.
Maybe. Just like you're better
Possibly.
off
Oh, right,
if you get a J&J followed by Moderna. That's the best way you could vaccinate yourself, but they weren't talking about that then.
No. I'm going to have to bring that up, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, it's I don't pretend to have all the answers, but when you try to look at the whole big
I'll
picture, to
pretend.
me, that's what's going
You've
on
got
here.
them. Yeah. That's really fascinating, all of that. And that tells you how many complicating factors there are. And then to end up at the end and say, well, maybe it's not any of this science. It's just a bunch of people going to bars, and that's bad.
Well,
Social
you know what?
science.
Here's the alternative. I did the research, and I saw a video on YouTube for 10 minutes. And now
Yeah.
I know what's going on, and you all
yes.
are nuts, and I'm doing it my way.
Right. That's not going to work either. And I did see somebody commenting on the whole situation yesterday. It's been ongoing that people are instant experts. And, of course, everybody's saying it's amazing how many people not only became expert epidemiologists during
The same people
breakdown.
became expert foreign policy analysts.
Yes,
and
now
they're
they
doing
know how to
Afghanistan.
fix Afghanistan. It's true. Exactly.
But
But
still, my favorite, I
oh.
can't remember it because I'm old, but did I tell you about the Onion-like article from Australia?
That sounds like it rings a bell. But you better tell me again because I'm old too.
Doctors in hospital replaced by patients who did the research.
Okay.
And a cost-saving maneuver.
I don't know. I don't know if we actually got that one on the air or not, but we have now. So at
It's
least
a
we got that
great
going.
concept.
Pretty good. Yeah, this I saw somebody saying yesterday. I've watched you all on.
Well, instead
Twitter.
of having my kid being taken care of by a pediatric intensivist who's trained for years and years for this, instead let's replace him with a parent who's done the research.
Right, a couple minutes on Google is all it takes.
A couple of minutes on Google is all you need.
I saw somebody yesterday saying last year I saw you all complaining that you couldn't understand your kid's math class and couldn't help them with math anymore. Now you're an epidemiologist. It's like, okay, you can do the modeling on this, but you couldn't help with the algebra last year. Sure.
Right. Well, basically the Instapundits are essentially, this is wrong. I'll get to why in a minute. Give me a couple of days to study it. But what I know is that it's wrong, and I'm going to say so in no uncertain terms.
Right.
Right now.
Well, people who have done their own research, I see. I'm noting for the record here, Rebecca Roman sends me this one about people who are in the hospital for something else, I guess, presumably, and are insisting, I don't know with what success, that they only get blood transfusions from unvaccinated donors. I don't know if there's any record of any of that, but yeah, I guess they've done their research.
Why don't you just put white people?
Right, exactly. And, of course, it's noted here as tainted blood, which only brings me back to the old tainted love is now in my head forever. And
Well,
every 5 seconds.
I only want blood from people who understand economic anxiety.
Oh, yeah.
You got to screen for that. There must be antibodies.
That could really
You guys are good
work.
at this. Come on.
Right, exactly. Well, okay, I only want college-educated blood. How about that? No, you're not going to let me do that? All right, fine. I don't know whether they traced that stuff or not. I guess at some point they probably started asking donors whether they were vaccinated, but mostly about, like, should we let you into our blood bank, I guess. Right. But did they put anything on the ticket? I don't know. So they just tell them, the blood's fine. Here you go. I don't know.
So,
I don't know what you answer people
in
like
the few minutes we have left, I suppose we should touch on Afghanistan.
Oh, all right.
I see, the usual, it's funny, the non-Trumpers that I never Trumpers that I like to follow, remember, were originally right-wing neocons.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. So this will make
So Max Boot, for example, of course we made a mistake by getting out of Afghanistan. We should have stayed and done the same footprint, yada, yada, yada. And the trouble is this country just doesn't really know what it wants to do. Well,
20 years, he didn't win.
Afghanistan was a mistake. We needed to go in maybe. Okay, I'll give you that. At Tora Bora, we should have stayed and gotten bin Laden. Then we should have gotten out. We should have gotten out after Obama killed Osama. We should have gotten out then. We had another chance. We didn't.
Yeah.
And no, staying isn't going to make it better. And how bad things are so bad that the neocons still lie to themselves and us about, if only a couple of more weeks could have done this, that, or anything else. So this is from August 15, 2021, The Ides of August by Sarah Chase.
Ides of August. Very good.
Sarah Chase is an interesting character because she's somebody who went to cover Taliban for NPR and stayed.
Oh, I love this country. I'm going to stay. Like Costa Rica. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And stayed. And then did a lot of charity work there.
She's been hitting the Poppy
For those of you who don't know me, here's my background, the perspective from which I write. I covered the fall of the Taliban for NPR, making my way into their former capital, Kandahar, in December 2001. A few days after the collapse of the regime, descending the last great hill into the desert city, I saw a dusty ghost town. Pickup trucks with rocket launchers strapped to the struts patrolled the streets. People pulled on my militia friends' sleeves, telling them where to find a Taliban weapons cache or a last holdout, but most remained indoors. It was Ramadan. And a few days later, the pent-up joy erupted. Kites took to the air. Horsemen on gorgeous chargers tore across a dusty common in sprint after sprint. No panic rush to the airport. I reported for a month or so, and then I passed it off to Steve Inskeep, now Morning Edition host. Within another couple of months, I was back, not as a reporter this time, but to try to actually do something. A reminder, Steve Inskeep and a lot of the other reporters who are talking about Afghanistan now have experience in regard to the sense that they were there, but they also have personal ties, which definitely colors their reporting. Mm-hmm. I was back not as a reporter this time, but to try to actually do something. I stayed for a decade. I ran 2 nonprofits in Kandahar, living in an ordinary house and speaking Pashto, and eventually went to work for 2 commanders of the international troops, then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. And you can read about my time there in my first 2 books, The Punishment of Virtue and Thieves of State. From that standpoint, speaking as an American, adoptive Kandahari, former senior U.S. government official, here are the key factors I see in today's climax of a 2-decade-long fiasco: government corruption and the U.S. role enabling and reinforcing it. She singles out 2 things: the graft of the Afghani leaders and Pakistan. And particularly, do we really suppose the Taliban, a ragtag disjointed militia hiding out in the hills, was able to execute such a sophisticated campaign plan with no international backing? Where do you suppose the campaign plan came from? Who gave the orders? Where did all the men, all the material, the endless supply of money to buy off local Afghan army and police commanders come from? How is it that new officials were appointed in Kandahar within a day of the fall? The new governor, mayor, director of education, and chief of police all speak with a Kandahari accent, but nobody I know has ever heard of them. I speak with a Kandahari accent, too. Quetta is full of Pashtuns, the main ethnic group in Afghanistan, and people of Afghan descent and their children. Who are these people? Over the same years, by the way, the Pakistani military also provided nuclear technology to Iran and North Korea. But for 2 decades, while all this is going on, the U.S. insisted on considering Pakistan an ally, and we still do. And then she talks about how Hamid Karzai came out of nowhere. Yeah. And the other person mentioned together with Karzai is Gulbuddin Hikmatyar, a bona fide Taliban commander who could take the lead in some conversations with them. And as Americans have witnessed in their own context, like Me Too and George Floyd, the abrupt collapse of 20 years' effort in Afghanistan is one of those cases where surprisingly abrupt events are months or years in the quiet making. So what role did Pakistan play in all of this? Yes. Self-delusion. How many times did you read stories about how the Afghan security forces steady progress? How often over the past 2 decades did you hear some U.S. official proclaim that the Taliban's eye-catching attacks in urban settings were signs of desperation? Heartwarming accounts about the good we were doing, especially for women and girls. Who are we deluding? Ourselves? What else are we deluding ourselves about? And one final point. I hold U.S. civilian leadership across 4 administrations largely responsible. Military commanders certainly participated. I can and did find fault with generals I worked for or observed, but the U.S. military is subject to civilian control. And the 2 primary problems identified above, corruption and Pakistan, are civilian issues. They are not problems men and women in uniform can solve. But faced with calls to do so, no top civilian decision maker was willing to take either of those problems on. The political risk for them was too high, and as many of these officials enjoy their retirement, like the latest Afghanistan president who fled to Tajikistan reportedly with millions of dollars. Who's suffering the cost? Question. Where did he get the millions of dollars? Is it true? I don't know. I don't know how he fit it in his overhead bin. Right. Must have been hard closing it, but whatever. So the point she's trying to make is that, as per Max Boot, you can't just fix this by staying another couple of weeks.
Okay, I believe that. Yeah, I don't think that was going to work any. She made some interesting points about Pakistan, and a lot of people bringing that up now, and I guess now is as good a time as any. Before would have been good too. But yeah, their distribution of nuclear technology also reminds me of yet another thing that I've been recently reminded of, that there's now burgeoning investigation into our good friend and ally in Saudi Arabia, also with their weird interest in acquiring their own nuclear technology. And it just seems like we have an awful lot of strangely close allies in the Muslim world that we supposedly depend on as rocks of stability in that world that are, well, they may have their own agendas and might be distributing nuclear technology outside of our preferred channels. And,
so one last point before the end of the hour.
Okay.
So you go in, and the Afghan government collapses, Taliban takes over, chaos at the airport.
Sure.
The airport's now stabilized and people are leaving, but the problem is you can't get to the airport. That's not at all stabilized. So that's a very difficult situation, and the military says we don't have the wherewithal to go and get people. Once they get to the airport, we can get them out, and we will, and we'll take 2-3 weeks to do that, and then you can judge how we did. So that's a problem, but then you take those folks out who are at the airport, who are able to get to the airport. What do you do with them?
Right.
And that leads to this article in the Washington Post. Divisions emerge among Republicans over how to handle Afghan refugees.
Yes.
So basically you have the Trumpists who say, of course we can't take them, they're dirty and diseased, just listen to Tucker Carlson.
Yeah.
And you
Stephen
have the
Miller.
past neocons who say, of course we have to take them. We're responsible. We should have stayed there, but if we didn't, we certainly have to put them. So now the Trump wing of the party and the neocon wing of the party are going to wind up fighting about that.
Awesome. Yeah, they are, and they already are doing it. I saw Stephen Miller on TV largely taking, just as you said, the Trumpist position. Oh, we can't take them. But it was interesting. He came to mind because of what you said about Pakistan. And he said his solution was, well, why don't we just settle them in Pakistan? Which I think the Sarah Chase article actually answers. That doesn't really necessarily take them out of danger. They'll be facing the same pressures in Pakistan that they did in Afghanistan. So, I don't know, but of course Stephen Miller is probably wrong about everything anyway, so not too hard to reject his position out of hand. All right, thanks, Greg. We'll wrap it up, and we'll be seeing you next week then.
I suppose.
Thanks for coming by.
Yeah.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yes, thank you very much to Greg for filling that in the entire hour, actually. Well worth it. And I think, he's going to get around to putting up the Mississippi Haunted Eyes picture. So hopefully, if you tweet that around, people who are listening live can go see it, and I can grab the tweet, and we can just include the tweet with your photo in it, or however you want to work it. If you've got the article that has it, that'll work too. Now everyone needs to see this thing. It's on everyone's mind. Okay. But thanks for taking us around into all of those areas, both the pandemic and Afghanistan, Pakistan roundup. There are other things going on, believe it or not. And one of the more interesting things that I saw in the last day or two is the ongoing FBI prosecutions, or investigations and then federal prosecutions, of January 6th Capitol rioters taking some unexpected turns in the courtroom. And the most interesting aspect of this, I think, is that there have been a number of these cases where the prosecution or the case being made against people has been significantly bolstered, of course, by FBI investigation, but more interestingly, and in many cases more impactfully and more importantly, by amateur internet sleuths, people who are, I guess you could say, doing their own research on the internet. But in this time, they're doing it relatively thoroughly and doing a good job and finding out things that are actually true and important, as opposed to our amateur epidemiologists doing their own research and coming up with ideas like take horse medicine and drink fish tanks and put light bulbs where ordinarily the sun don't shine. I don't know how good that message is, but as it turns out, yesterday was a big day for this, as they were right in the middle of, or just about to begin a sentencing hearing on a particular, I don't remember offhand the guy's name, but I have some tweets that might reveal it, but one of the Capitol rioter defendants who had pled guilty to some lesser charge because I guess the FBI decided, well, we're able to place him there. We have his admission that he was inside the Capitol, and we can therefore charge him with some sort of low-level trespass type crime, but we want to prosecute it nonetheless, but we're not sure we have enough evidence for any more. And basically, as I understand it, people on the internet scouring through things, the sedition hunters, as they call themselves, scouring all the available video and photos and everything, were the ones who came up with capture from a video, not only placing this defendant who was about to be sentenced to something minimal, with not only placing him at the Capitol, but yes, involving him directly in and documenting his assault on a police officer, which changed the whole picture. And it didn't come up until sentencing. Now, as I said, he had already pled guilty, but the federal prosecutors apparently handled things smartly and probably in routine fashion. And it's routine now because it's generally proved to be smart. But their plea agreement with him basically said, well, if there's any material information that comes up that actually implicates you in a crime versus one of these federal misdemeanors for which you're trying you now, then we reserve the right to go back and prosecute that. We're not waiving our right to prosecute you for outright criminal activity just because we're accepting your plea on this misdemeanor. And it happened, and they had to reverse course, and they go back in, and instead of fighting over whether or not to sentence him to 2 months in jail just to sort of teach him a lesson, they're back to, well, maybe we need to do more. I happened to see Ryan Riley tweeting quite actively about this yesterday following all the courtroom proceedings. And he, I'll read through, how long is this thread of tweets he's got here? Let's start at the beginning of it, and then we'll read this piece he refers us to give us a real flavor for what's going on here. He says, yesterday, something astonishing happened in a January 6th case today. A Capitol defendant who took a misdemeanor plea deal was about to be sentenced, and then sedition hunters, who you can find on Twitter and under that handle, just sedition hunters, all, one word, no underscores or anything. Then sedition hunters surfaced multiple videos showing him assaulting an officer. There's a story here, and it's a Huffington Post or HuffPost story that he refers everybody to here from Christopher Mathias, a senior reporter for HuffPost. And but he goes on tweeting about this. By the way, I will note this interesting bit for the record. When I saw this video capture being circulated yesterday, it had little identifying marks in the corner to logos, etc. Where was this video coming from? And it appeared to be coming from a Russian source, which is ordinarily something you treat with some suspicion, and people were asking about it. But I guess, it was video taken that day. I guess it's an interesting question how it is that this, someone's personal video, I think, that they may have uploaded to who knows what, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, God knows where they might have originally put it in terms of social media, but that it made its way to Russian media and not into the hands of American federal prosecutors handling the case. I don't think there's necessarily anything nefarious about it. It's just interesting the way it went, and a testament to the thoroughness with which Sedition Hunters is prosecuting the task here, that they are scraping video off of foreign media as well and examining that. If for some reason, just pure saturation, it hasn't really circulated in the United States because every network has all it can handle. Well, anyway, let me read Ryan Riley's thread about this thing. Then maybe we go back and read the HuffPost article and perhaps the NPR story to which Ryan refers in the end, which I put away. So again, something astonishing is happening. Sedition Hunters is the one that surfaced multiple videos that showed this defendant about to take a misdemeanor plea assaulting officers. The quick response to last-minute discovery of images showing a suspected assault clearly shows the dedication of all involved, said the Sedition Hunters team, and I guess this clip comes from out of the HuffPost article. The Sedition Hunters team are extremely grateful for all the challenging work the FBI and DOJ are putting into each individual case, and their willingness to accept the assistance from our community of researchers. They really didn't have to do that, and really, if I had to guess, initially, I would have guessed that they just wouldn't, and they would just, they would be characterized as holding their nose, but or making people talk to the hand, or whatever body part you want to use to describe how this would go. And there are several. But, they really could have just said, leave it to us. And they didn't. And that's amazing and great. And it's a great development. Though, I guess, if you want to take, everything with a grain of salt or some amount of caution in here, I guess, you want to be careful, for instance, about the possibility that a differently led FBI or DOJ, i.e., say, in Trumpist hands, accepting the so-called research of MAGA types and Trumpists and Proud Boys and QAnon weirdos, etc., and just that's how we got into this mess in the Arizona so-called audit, about which we have more news too, and other states wanting to do the same thing. I've done the research, and stovepiping pure BS directly to a Trumpist-led FBI and DOJ would be a real problem. So you might say, well, isn't it the case that because it's, inuring to your political benefit, you're excited about this? That's one explanation of it. I guess another explanation is, if your DOJ and FBI are weighing the evidence that's coming in and saying, objectively, in the end, we think that this is evidence that stands on its own, meets the thresholds necessary, will meet all the evidentiary admissibility tests, and demonstrates something real and something that we can illustrate to a court, such that a federal judge will not only admit the evidence, but allow us to show it to a jury, and it really helps us draw a real conclusion, as opposed to saying, well, what you can't see here is they're all full of bamboo fibers, but once you accept that, then you know that China was controlling them all remotely. Right. Well, that won't really fly in a real court. This stuff, stands up to real use in a real courtroom. So that's the difference. But, I guess we ought to have some note of caution about how readily the FBI or DOJ ought to, in fact, accept amateur sleuthing. But if on their own examination it holds up, then fine, great. I guess the real danger is that a Trumpist administration would just say, well, it holds up. It doesn't, and I guess ultimately the test there for that is a real courtroom, but I guess you can contaminate a real courtroom with a Trumpist judge as well, who will just say, now other judges might say it doesn't hold up, but I say it does. There's always that danger. And I think I always try to warn you every chance we get that, when the rulemaking is, narrowed down to one person or one very small group of people, you do have to watch out for people just saying, well, the hell with it. We'll just declare this to be the case and be done with it. But here they are thanking the Sedition Hunters, and the Sedition Hunters thanking the FBI and DOJ not only for putting so much work into it, but for being willing to accept assistance from, as they say, their community of researchers. The quick response to last-minute discovery of images showing a suspected assault clearly shows the dedication by all involved. Riley goes on then to write, here's a very timely Tim K. Mack. Is that right? Is that his? Tim Mack, NPR investigative correspondent. He refers to this story. This is the one I put away. Here's a very timely Tim Mack segment on the Sedition Hunters community. That'll help explain who they are, and we'll read that one as well. He then tweeted, they can uncover new evidence of conduct that'll elevate a misdemeanor trespassing case into something much more serious. And it's not that they're trumping it up either. It's that they're presenting evidence that the government is not fully aware of what this person actually did. And they're about to get away with it on a misdemeanor level when closer monitoring of evidence that's already in existence and in circulation shows that they really ought to be charged with something else. So how many of these do we have here? Let's see. We've got the Chris Mathias HuffPost article about the specific case and how they handled it. We've got the Tim Mock NPR story about how sedition hunters works and what they're doing, and then another HuffPost piece about the sedition hunters as a group and who they are and what they're doing. Riley then tweets, they call themselves sedition hunters, and they have receipts. Here another clip from one of the HuffPost, I guess the second of the HuffPost articles. The sedition hunters scour the web for any and all photographs, videos, and posts from people at the Capitol during the January 6th attack across well-known websites like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, along with lesser-used sites and apps like Rumble, Gab, and Telegram. I don't think I've heard of Rumble. They've got spreadsheets, Google Docs, links, bookmarks, unlisted YouTube backups, group chats, and all kinds of stuff. And in fact, if we read that article, we'll find out what some of those things are. Today really was quite astonishing. An 11th hour find by online sleuths just totally changing the trajectory of a federal prosecution. With an embedded tweet here, this one from Alan Feuer, the New York Times legal matters correspondent, saying, this victory lap is earned. In no other criminal prosecution I've covered in 20 plus years have citizen sleuths played such a central role. It speaks to A, their tireless efforts, B, the power of digital search techniques, and C, the lack of capacity at the FBI to handle so many cases, which is really quite worrying. He himself embeds the tweet of sedition hunters themselves, saying, sentencing for Robert Reeder continued until October 8th. A very, very special shout out to a team of great individuals who have and are working so hard, have worked and are working, we should say, so hard to hold Capitol rioters accountable. You are valued beyond words. And again, the big difference here is their research stands up to scrutiny, whereas the I've done my own research crowd, when it comes to election integrity, as they like to call it, it just doesn't. I mean, it falls apart at every test. You saw them lose 60 plus cases before the end of last year on this. And now they continue to sue over and over again on the same evidence, which just doesn't stand up. And they're finding so far nothing that stands up in any significant way in Arizona either. But still, no matter, they've convinced people around the country that Arizona-style audits, as they actually call them, which is embarrassing to have to, hang your hat on that, I would think. But people want an Arizona-style audit in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in Michigan, in every state. And those styles of audit have yielded nothing. All right, I guess we'll do it in the order that Ryan Riley provided to us. And no surprise, I mean, there's nothing wrong with self-promotion here. Ryan Riley and Christopher Mathias teamed up for this first referred to article. And why not? They've been doing the work. Feds weigh new charges for Capitol rioter allegedly caught on video attacking cops. And what better case to do this with, really? As Robert Reeder awaited sentencing for a misdemeanor, online sleuths known as sedition hunters surfaced potentially incriminating new footage. And by the way, I don't have this story at the ready, but it reminds me of another recent development in which some, jackass was on the New York City subway yelling and screaming at somebody for having a mask on. But in particular, I think this one went viral because he's yelling and screaming at someone who appears to be an older woman, like maybe elderly woman. Anyway, he was a real jerk, and of course everybody was interested in identifying him, and the online sleuth types did in fact identify him, and in fact they identified him, interestingly enough, as one of a putative Proud Boy, which, by the way, I guess they don't care about their reputation any more than the rest of the Trumpers and Trump society cares about their reputation, but I don't know, if any of them anywhere think like, well, is this really something to be proud of as a proud boy? Like, it's one thing for us to have the reputation of being tough guys who will fight anybody, and so watch out for them and tread carefully around them, or give them what they want because they'll beat you up otherwise. Like, is it really helpful for their image to be, and are they proud of being proud boys berating old women? Like, that doesn't really do much to help make you out as a tough guy. And he didn't look like a particularly tough guy. I say putative proud boy. Like, he may in fact be a member of this. But of course, we've also seen that at their height, they were circulating videos of their initiation ritual, or punching. You get a punch in or a beat in into the gang. So you have to be tough because you have to survive a beating in order to, be able to get in here. And then we saw that the beating was a bunch of doughy guys sort of half-ass tapping one another. Well, I think the test was they get to punch you until you can name 5 breakfast cereals, which was never really a very sensible way of determining toughness to begin with. But then the punches were weak because they didn't want to really hit each other very hard. And, how long could it last before somebody is going, ow, hee, Frosted Flakes, fast enough, right? So anyway, he seemed to be one of those guys. But here he is berating this woman, and they identified him online, and great. And of course he was complaining, oh, I've been doxxed, which other people said, you mean you've been held accountable for your public actions? Anyway, similar type of work going on there. But here, these cases are actually in court, so very interesting. A federal judge delayed the sentencing of Capitol rioter Robert Reeder on Wednesday, just hours after a community of online sleuths, collectively known as the Sedition Hunters, surfaced several new videos that allegedly showed Reeder assaulting a Capitol police officer during the January 6th attack. The videos, published at the Sedition Hunters Twitter page, were discovered about 4 hours before the court hearing, according to a post from the account. This is truly a massive undertaking, the Sedition Hunters account posted. Did we make it in time? Reeder was scheduled to be sentenced Wednesday afternoon on a plea deal he reached in June, in which he'd pleaded guilty to 1 misdemeanor count of parading, demonstrating, or picketing in a Capitol building. The terms of the plea deal allowed prosecutors to bring additional charges if they discovered evidence of any violent crimes that Reeder committed on January 6th or beyond. And, I'd be particularly interested in what did Reeder tell the court in preparation for his plea deal and in preparation for sentencing when he thought he wasn't going to be busted on the violence. Oh, I was just a, peaceful protester or exercising my rights, and I understand that it was illegal and I'm willing to accept, blah, blah, blah. But he probably swore on a stack of Bibles at some point that he hadn't been violent, and then poof. Well, all that goes up in smoke. The prosecutor indicated on Wednesday that the government had planned to argue for a 6-month prison sentence when they received the first video, but then decided to ask for a delay in the sentencing so they could evaluate all the evidence. Reeder's attorney agreed to the delay, as did Judge Thomas Hogan. The Fed's decision to seek a delay strongly suggests that they will bring separate charges against Reeder for assaulting the officer. The series of videos allegedly show Reeder grabbing and shoving a police officer on the steps of the U.S. Capitol on January 6th as a mob storms the building, spurred by former President Donald Trump's lies about a stolen election. The man believed to be Reeder is quickly tackled to the ground by an officer. A HuffPost reporter attempted to show Reeder one of the clearest videos as he approached the courtroom on Wednesday. Reeder stayed silent and his lawyer intervened. So he's well trained there. Afterward, Reeder, his face covered in a blue medical mask, much like the one that was strapped to his chin on January 6th, showed up masked, that's good, faced a wall outside the courtroom and appeared emotional. When he entered the courtroom, he asked for tissues. When asked about the video after the hearing, Reeder's lawyer said he had a different interpretation of the videos but declined to elaborate. And one of the videos is embedded here for your review. The person who runs the Sedition Hunters account told HuffPost in a statement that they are glad federal prosecutors and the FBI have been so willing to accept their help as they prosecute an unprecedented caseload in connection with the January 6th attack. The FBI has arrested more than 575 defendants in connection with the Capitol riot. Hundreds more arrests are in the works. The Sedition Hunters team are grateful, extremely grateful, for all the challenging work the FBI and DOJ are putting into each individual case, and the willingness to accept the assistance of our community of researchers, right? We already read this part. The Reader case is the second time this week alone that members of the broader sedition hunters community have influenced the direction of an ongoing prosecution. On Monday, online sleuths surfaced images that show Capitol defendant Samuel Lazar, L-A-Z-A-R, I don't know how he pronounces it, holding weapons he'd been banned from purchasing. Images that will make it more difficult for him to secure pretrial release. Way to go. A number of key targets have also been arrested in recent days based on the work of online investigators. Last week, the FBI arrested a suspect whom sleuths had nicknamed Tunnel Commander, although he's hashtag Tunnel Commander. This week, the FBI arrested 2 more suspects, dubbed Cat Sweat and 3% Sheriff. All were arrested in connection with the beating of police officers on Capitol steps. Good bust. Okay. Then embedded, they note here, here's the Russian connection. And above, the caption says, a video from the state-run news channel Russia 24 allegedly shows Robert Reader in a red hat and blue mask attacking a police officer at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. Again, how they got it, and nobody else did, I don't think it's nefarious. It's just a matter of there was so much video out there to choose from. Some people chose this one. Some people chose that one. Probably for propaganda purposes, they chose this one. And in that case, I guess it pays to review Russian propaganda about January 6th. They may have more footage, and it can help you indict more people. Earlier this month, Robert Bonsib, Reader's lawyer, argued in court that he was simply an, quote, accidental tourist inside the Capitol on January 6th, not a violent insurrectionist. Whoops. Well, the lawyer is entitled to make that argument. But yes, it can be held against the defendant, if not the lawyer, unless, of course, it's provable that the lawyer knew that that wasn't the case. But even so, if he's arguing what the evidence demonstrates, he's probably still okay. Reader made a spur-of-the-moment decision and regrettable mistake when he attended a rally in support of Trump and then followed the MAGA mob to the Capitol, Bonsib wrote in court filings, and that could still be true. Mr. Reader is not politically active, is not and has never been a member of any right-wing or anti-government or extremist groups, and has unfortunately been publicly grouped with many others whose views he abhors, Bonsib wrote. But, you know, another judge might care, but you hit a cop, you're going in. It's basically what we're seeing happen here, if you remember that scene from Good Will Hunting. On Tuesday, a day before the scheduled sentencing, prosecutors submitted 20 pages worth of messages and memes that Reader allegedly posted to social media in the weeks leading up to the attack on the Capitol, in which he expressed his belief in the baseless conspiracy theory that Democrats stole the 2020 presidential election. Unbelievable, Reader wrote in one message, according to the court filings. Almost a month and a half after the election, the Democrats are still finding mysterious ballots in their 4th attempt to overthrow the election results that have been recounted 3 times in favor of the Republicans, which never was. Democrats just can't stop cheating and lying, but you see where his mind is in all this. The court filings also show Reader belonging to right-wing Facebook groups with names like Stop the Steal, Hop on the Trump Train, and Joe Biden is not my president, which is, bad for his argument that he doesn't belong to any right-wing groups. But it's not the Proud Boys. It's not, whatever you would. I don't know if you can designate QAnon membership or anything like that. He's not a 3%er, at least according to this. There might be evidence that he is, but it's not here in this one. All right, let's see. Other bits from this piece. Authorities initially used facial recognition to identify Reader as one of the Capitol rioters. Online sleuths have similarly used the technology to generate leads. Reader was charged in February with 4 misdemeanor counts related to the attack and accepted a plea deal in June. According to court documents, Reader's lawyers provided authorities with videos he filmed during his activities in and around the Capitol on January 6th. One video shows Reader wearing a red Make America Great Again hat just outside the Capitol building and chanting, "Fight for Trump." Later in the video, he says to the camera, "I was one of the last people out. I was in there for over half an hour. I got gassed several times inside the Capitol, many times outside the Capitol, got shot with pepper balls. It was effing nuts. We had to do battle with the police inside. It was crazy, absolutely insane. And of course, saying that you were doing battle with the police inside probably isn't very good for your case either, but it by itself doesn't prove that he actually engaged in any violence. Not like the video does, but it does tend to prove that he might have. And by the way, his assessment of the whole thing was that it was crazy and absolutely insane, which of course you could argue were just figures of speech, but actually are pretty good encapsulations with what went on. The thing you did, crazy, absolutely insane, definitely deserves jail time in my view. Anyway, there's a little bit more to wind up this article. I will read it after the break, and then we'll go on to these other recommended items, too, to give you a fuller picture of who the hunters are. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I got a little distraction going on one side over here, but let me go back to the main computer and finish up Ryan Riley and I've now forgotten. Yeah, Chris Mathias. That's right. I'm sorry, Chris. And their article. There's just a very little bit left about Robert Reeder here. Right. So he had his own video, and the cops and investigators already had a hold of that one, in which he says he was inside for over half an hour. But there was no video of him committing any violent acts. 7 months after their efforts began, the quick action from authorities in response to the evidence uncovered by sedition hunters is a boost for a community of online investigators who want to ensure that those who attempted to storm the Capitol and block a free and fair election are held accountable. I want that. That's a good thing. A very, very special shout out to a team of great individuals who have been and are working so hard. We read this before, but I want to read it again. Who have been working so hard to hold Capitol rioters accountable. The Sedition Hunters account tweeted Wednesday after Reeder's hearing was delayed. You are valued beyond words. So I thought I would spend a couple of words on, saying how valued you are. So I agree. Very well. Excellent work there. No doubt about it. Let me go back to Ryan Riley's tweet thread, and I will share them in order as he shared them. There was the Tim Mack segment on Sedition Hunters on NPR, which you can listen to. I mean, you could just have them read it to you in 5 minutes or so, but they also, of course, give you the text of it, so I'll read it to you so that there's no copyright violation here. Tim Mack writing again for NPR. The FBI keeps using clues from volunteer sleuths to find the January 6th Capitol rioters. As rioters made their way through the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, many of them live-streamed their actions and posted photos and videos on social media, which we all knew was going to get them caught eventually. But then, I don't know, it took too long. But now it's starting to happen. That steady stream of content created an enormous record of evidence that law enforcement needed to sift through to build cases against the accused. Now, more than 575 federal criminal complaints have been filed, and a striking pattern has emerged. Time and time again, the FBI is relying on crowdsourced tips from an ad hoc community of amateur investigators, sifting through that pile of content for clues. These informal communities go by a number of names. Some go by the moniker Sedition Hunters. Others call themselves Deep State Dogs. I haven't heard much about them. But, you do yourself no PR favors there. I know it's just a joke. But anyway, together they amount to hundreds of people who, since January 6th, have dedicated themselves to helping law enforcement track down suspects. And I will say this, it's not a new practice, and that doesn't mean it's any less valuable. But people, and many of the same people, have been doing this for a long time But outside of, the auspices of the sedition hunting, there wasn't sedition they were checking into, but more often when there was video of people violently assaulting minorities in apparent hate crimes, there were lots of people who dedicated themselves to doing what they could do to try and identify the perpetrators, and it's valuable work, and I'm glad they've been doing it, and it's good, especially people who seek, fame through hate crimes by posting their stuff to their own social media groups, thinking they're doing so with impunity because no one can figure out who they are from this. I covered my face, or they don't know where it was, or they can't figure out who I am. I'm just a regular guy in the street, almost daring everybody to try and catch them. And people have been doing that for a long time, and I've been interested in those stories, and I've read a few of them to you. I'm just glad it's happening in this context now. Anyway, their cumulative work represents what is likely the largest spontaneous open source information collection and analysis effort ever conducted by volunteers to assist law enforcement. Sedition hunters are mentioned by name in at least 13 cases. Other complaints reference specific social media handles of volunteers, and still more refer to evidence voluntarily submitted by tipsters, many of whom do not seem to know the accused, citing information on public platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Parler. Part of their rise was perhaps by necessity. Federal investigators were facing a gargantuan mountain, that's a very large mountain, of public or open source evidence. I believe 9/11 was not as complex as this, said Greg Hunter, a defense attorney who has worked on the cases of a number of individuals charged in the insurrection. The evidence is significantly more complicated for the government than they had thought it was going to be. That's clear. They say that this is the most complex thing they've ever done. This may have opened up an opportunity for Americans, many with no formal training or intelligence, or rather in intelligence or law enforcement. They have plenty of intelligence themselves, to lend a hand. The FBI, of course, was overwhelmed with this mammoth task of identifying these individuals. The sedition hunters community, everyone started individually reviewing all the footage, said Forrest Rogers, an American who is a member of the group Deep State Dogs. The FBI's National Threat Operations Center saw a 750% rise in calls and electronic tips following January 6th, the Bureau told NPR. The FBI encourages the public to continue to send tips to the FBI. As we have seen with dozens of cases so far, the tips matter. Tipsters should rest assured that the FBI is working diligently behind the scenes to follow all investigative leads to verify tips from the public and bring these criminals to justice, said Samantha Shiro, a spokesperson for the FBI. I guess that gets us back to the point I was talking about earlier, why this is good but other stuff might be bad. And what separates it. And I guess for all of our complaints about it's taking too long, you have video, you can see who these people are, we know who they are, get them. Well, you know who they are. The FBI has to take its time in proving that they are who you say they are so that they can bring this case and have it stick. That's the difference between the Arizona audit type stuff or, various other doxings that are attempted by right-wing types where they either make a mistake or intentionally lie about what they're showing in hopes of getting people in trouble. But it never holds up because it's all just, sometimes it's just a lie, or at least it's all trumped up stuff. But you're asking the FBI to hand this over to the DOJ and for DOJ lawyers to go into court and, as officers of the court, swear that this stuff is true and it is evidence that is not only probative enough, but solid enough to send people to jail for. So, yeah, there's going to be some delay in between, online sleuths, whoever they are, and however good they may be, and however well-intentioned, to say, I figured out who this person is, and the DOJ being willing to say in court, that's this person. So I guess I understand that now, and I'm grateful for all the work that's gone on behind the scenes. Continuing on then, the volunteers who came forward to help the FBI had different motivations, but many felt the need to contribute to the effort to bring those involved in the January 6th Capitol insurrection to justice. I saw an attempted coup happen, and I never want to see that again. So for me, it was, what can I do to help prevent this? Said a sedition hunter named Kay. K-A-Y, not just the letter K. A 34-year-old stay-at-home mother in Washington State, who, by the way, if she was submitting evidence of her opposition to a vaccine, we would say was a lunatic, right? But that's not what she's doing. I mean, she may also be doing that, and she may be a lunatic on those things, but I don't know. Kay, who requested her last name be kept private, has spent hundreds of hours looking at videos from that day in her free time. I don't live anywhere near D.C. I have no political power. I'm just an ordinary person, really. But this was something I felt like I could do, she said. Kay began annotating videos, creating a spreadsheet where things spotted in videos could be listed, a person wearing a pink hat, for example. By using these cues, volunteers could compare different video angles to identify people committing alleged crimes. Tommy Karstensen, a Danish citizen, said he's watched thousands of videos since January. One tactic he used was to analyze the music playing in the background in various videos of the riot. Someone later created a playlist, and then if you heard Elton John, you would know, okay, this is at 2 p.m. And then you could say, okay, this individual was at that location at this time, Karstensen said. This is like just good detective work. Some of these groups have had some measurable success in aiding law enforcement. The group Deep State Dogs was able to identify the person who allegedly used a taser on Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone on the Capitol steps, even when law enforcement was apparently unaware of the person's identity. Rogers slowly watched every single frame of the incident and focused on watching the hand of the individual holding the taser. We located the suspect in different places throughout the event where he was carrying the taser in hand, Rogers said. Also, we found him with a frontal, and then we put it together as a compilation, submitted it to the FBI to make it easier for them to indeed identify. Law enforcement later publicly identified the individual as Daniel Rodriguez, who has since been charged with a number of serious offenses. As part of the filings in the case, federal prosecutors cited 2 Deep State Dogs videos that were in their possession. The use of this open source intelligence, publicly obtainable information, is a new twist on a long-time law enforcement tool. If we came back to the Wild West times of wanted posters, that's a form of open source intelligence, where they just have the sketch of the bank robber, Rogers said. It's just because of the internet and everyone's, unexplainable in my opinion, need to broadcast all their private information to the world that open source intelligence is becoming much more lucrative when it comes to identifying people. Yeah. Good point. Don't know why they're putting it up. Some of those volunteer sleuths, such as Karstensen, have also turned to facial recognition software to aid their efforts. It's a controversial tool that he acknowledges has broader shortcomings. I don't really like facial recognition when it's put in the hands of a government, say China monitoring the Uyghurs, he said. But in this case, it's all public video from a public location. But American law enforcement is also independently employing this technology to make the case against January 6th suspects. Documents in at least a dozen cases cite the use of facial recognition software. For example, suspect Stephen Chase Randolph, who has been charged with, among other things, assaulting a U.S. Capitol Police officer, was identified when the FBI used open source facial recognition to match a photo from the insurrection to the Instagram account of an acquaintance of Randolph's. Mitch Silber, former director of intelligence analysis for the New York City Police Department, said this technology is typically used only sparingly by law enforcement. Law enforcement in general, when they're sort of at wit's end and they haven't been able to make progress in identifying a suspect for a particular crime, it's sort of the move of last resort, Silber said. But civil liberties advocates said that even if the use of this technology in these cases could have been seen as a force for justice, the fundamental tool is dangerous. We know that many politicians and many police departments with this power would be, frankly, more likely to go after Black Lives Matter protesters than to go after insurrectionists, said Adam Schwartz of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital civil liberties advocacy organization. We support efforts to bring those insurrectionists to justice, but face recognition technology in the hands of the government is so dangerous that we think the government should not be using it at all. Schwartz said that it was notable law enforcement was so openly using facial recognition technology to support criminal cases and that doing so now may be strategic. it is common for the law enforcement community to try to work with the public in favor of a surveillance technology by not talking much about the technology until the right sympathetic case comes along. And then they talk about it a lot, Schwartz said. But live streaming, as well as public posts, including video and photos, are realities of mass political events in our time. So the use of crowdsourcing and facial recognition associated with the January 6th charges is not just unprecedented, but likely points to a trend that these tools will be used more frequently in the future. That's one of the dangers of modern technology. It's true, where there used to be a safety in numbers in this sort of lawless insurrection and rioting. That's now gone and has been gone for a while for more liberal or progressive leaning activists like Black Lives Matter. But I'm glad to at least to be seeing it used more even-handedly across the board, I guess. But I acknowledge their point at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. Lastly, Ryan Riley's own piece on sedition hunters from June of this year, just sort of more of a profile of the people. I thought we might perhaps end with that. Sedition hunters meet the online sleuths aiding the FBI's Capitol manhunt. 6 months and 500 arrests into the January 6th probe, a motley crew of online sleuths is generating leads, making connections, and keeping the feds on their toes. There's a mother and former teacher in South Central Pennsylvania, a woman I'll call Joan, who has what she calls a weird hobby. She's a Facebook detective. Some people crochet, some people paint. I look up people, Joan told me. I'm the go-to person for all my friends if they meet a new man. They're like, hey, look him up. Give me all the details. Sure, I've understood that. When an enraged mob stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, look them up. Joan was at home watching it unfold. She was deeply upset, finding herself in tears about the violent scene transpiring over 100 miles away in the nation's capital, which she'd visited as a kid and later on field trips with her own children. This is not who we are as a country, she said, before pausing and adding, or it's not who we're supposed to be. So she's very thoughtful. She could do well on this show. So just over a week after the Capitol attack, Joan was thrilled to have a new opportunity for online investigative work land in her inbox. This time, she wasn't vetting a potential romantic interest for one of her friends. She was hunting down an insurrectionist. It's been nearly 6 months since a violent mob, or had been at the time he wrote this, invaded the U.S. Capitol because they believed then-President Donald Trump's lies about mass voter fraud and supported his efforts to toss out millions of votes in Joe Biden's electoral victory. The feds were woefully unprepared for what Trump supporters had in store for lawmakers at the Capitol that day. Shell-shocked and outnumbered law enforcement officers were overwhelmed by rioters and made only a handful of arrests. The U.S. Capitol, the closely guarded building where a cardboard protest sign or an ill-timed laugh could get you let out of a congressional hearing in cuffs, had been overrun by an unruly mob. Hundreds of criminals were on the loose, spread out all across the country. The feds have spent the first half of 2021 playing catch-up, churning out Capitol attack cases on a nearly daily basis that cover behavior ranging from basic misdemeanor trespassing to brutal felony assaults on police officers. As the unprecedented probe reshapes the federal government's approach to domestic terrorism, Justice Department officials announced last week, and this is back in June, of course, they had cleared the benchmark of 500 arrests. Hundreds more are in the works, and Attorney General Merrick Garland said federal authorities would continue to follow the facts in this case and charge what the evidence supports to hold all January 6 perpetrators accountable. Garland, the former Oklahoma City bombing prosecutor and federal appellate judge whom Biden formally named as his nominee for the Justice Department's top position just hours after the insurrection, said DOJ's efforts were not possible without the continued assistance of the American public. Much of that assistance has come from people who personally knew Capitol suspects, including family members, co-workers, neighbors, Facebook frenemies, and old classmates who tipped off the FBI about the actions of someone they knew in real life. But there's a whole other batch of Capitol defendants who ended up on the FBI's radar thanks to the work of someone they'd never met, anonymous online sleuths who tracked down the digital breadcrumbs that Capitol suspects had often unknowingly sprinkled across the internet. They call themselves sedition hunters, and they have receipts. They're members of a loosely affiliated network of motivated individuals and pop-up volunteer organizations with names like Deep State Dogs and Capital Terrorists Exposers that developed after the January 6th attack to identify the Trump supporters who organized the Capitol riot and brutalized the law enforcement officers protecting the building. The sedition hunters scour the web for any and all photographs, videos, and posts from the people at the Capitol during the January 6th attack across well-known websites like Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, along with the lesser-known ones we mentioned before, Rumble, Gab, and Telegram. They got spreadsheets, Google Docs, links, bookmarks, unlisted YouTube backups, group chats, and screenshots, as Joan put it, coming out the rear end. They can uncover new evidence of conduct that'll elevate a misdemeanor trespassing case into something much more serious. Find the highest quality image of a suspect that could generate new leads through facial recognition, and compile multimedia databases that turn the January 6th attack into an interactive, high-stakes, and soul-crushing edition of Where's Waldo? Some of the early January 6th online sleuthing efforts, much like the early stages of the FBI investigation itself, were a bit chaotic. Some social media users started tossing out names without doing due diligence. But as the weeks and months went on, the online investigators rather swiftly professionalized, taking cues from open source research experts like John Scott Railton of the Citizen Lab at the University of Toronto and the open source research organization Bellingcat. Rule number 1, no naming suspects on social media. Read up on the Boston Marathon bombing for info on that. The community came together on Twitter, but now much of the more sensitive work takes place in non-public spaces, chat rooms, DM groups, shared Google documents, where members of the community collaborate and vet tips before they send them to the feds, and in some cases share them with reporters. Some of the investigations, like the one that helped take down Trump fanatic Daniel Rodriguez for electroshocking D.C. Metropolitan Police Officer Michael Fanone, are the work of trained researchers who prefer terms like OSINT, O-S-I-N-T, OS intelligence. I'm not sure what the OS is, but operational security, maybe intelligence, OSINT, to refer to their, open source, OS, intelligence techniques. Get it? OSINT, open source intelligence. I could have just read instead of trying to guess. Others, like the online sleuths who identified the man who assaulted officers with a fire extinguisher while wearing an American flag jacket emblazoned with Trump's name as Robert Scott Palmer, are self-described amateurs bringing their pre-existing skills to the table and pick up techniques as they go along. There are regional-focused sedition hunters like Joan, who collect evidence on Capitol rioters in their own backyards, and then there are groups that zero in on specific organizations like the Oath Keepers. There are archivists with the encyclopedic knowledge of the timeline, locations, and key players in the January 6th attack. There are hashtaggers who generate catchy, memorable nicknames to help the community track the actions of suspects still at large. There are the computer whizzes who create slick websites that let you explore evidence in a user-friendly format. There are the diplomats who serve as liaisons between break-off groups in the larger Sedition Hunters network, working to ease tensions and keep everyone working together in pursuit of a common goal. How do you like that? Pretty sophisticated, actually, at that level. Since the Capitol attack, I've been in touch, that's Ryan Riley, I've been in touch with dozens of investigators digging into the Capitol attack. They span the country, from progressive enclaves to deep red Trump territory, and even around the globe. Some of them have shared their names, others have disclosed personal details, and still others are fully anonymous sleuths I know only by their usernames, icons, and investigative track records. There's the academic tracking down Capitol seditionists in the heart of Trump country, the woman who perfected her detective skills as she recovered from cancer surgery, the online researcher desperately trying to get someone at the FBI to accept gigabytes of Capitol videos they have scraped from the depths of the internet, the sedition hunter known by their thumbs up emoji, who is, quote, just helping out because they felt a duty to their country to archive as much January 6th material as possible, and is still seeing mountains of new material every day. The meme-making sleuth from The Hague, appropriate enough, who enjoys both hunting down insurrectionists and filming TikToks with their grandkids. Even the spouse of a Capitol police officer has joined in, leaning on their familiarity with the Capitol grounds and trying to channel their frustration into something productive. Since January 6th, this pop-up probe launched by a ragtag group of volunteer investigators has developed into a well-oiled machine, churning out leads faster than the feds can pick them up. Sedition hunters are happy to help. They just like a little feedback. Here's one. Sammy is a sedition hunter who started hunting for insurrectionists as she recovered from cancer surgery. Sammy, which is a pseudonym, found herself immersed in the work, which she found to be a wonderful escape from reality. Even though it is reality, it's a great distraction from my own worries, she told me. I feel like I'm doing something useful when I can't do much of anything else. Yet Sammy was also growing flustered with not knowing whether the tips she submitted actually ended up in the right hands. She jokingly suggested the FBI take a page from the Domino's Tracker app, imagining getting alerts assuring her that the tips weren't just buried in an inbox somewhere. 1 p.m., Agent Smith has received your tip, she imagined they'd say. 3:45 p.m., Agent Smith is cross-referencing your tip. Then, when they actually go and get the guy, they show, like, a Google map in real time, she said, laughing. There are very valid reasons that the FBI can't go into that much detail about an unfolding investigation, of course, but tipsters still sometimes feel like the feds aren't paying attention. The Bureau has to sort through hundreds of thousands of tips, and solid leads on violent insurrectionists have been overlooked. With no basic feedback loop, frustrated sedition hunters have no clue what is happening behind the scenes and are sometimes left thinking that the information they submitted to the Bureau is just buried in a database somewhere. The process between tip intake and arrest can easily stretch into weeks and months, especially given the massive backlog of tips that the FBI received in the immediate aftermath of the Capitol attack, where there was a 750% increase in calls and electronic tips to the FBI's National Threat Operations Center. Anonymous tips can take longer to verify than tips from those who know a suspect personally, but the feds appreciate the public's help and want to reassure Capitol tipsters frustrated by what those operating at internet speed see as the slow churn of federal prosecutions and bureaucracy. As we have seen with dozens of cases so far, the tips matter. While it may appear that no overt law enforcement action is being taken on some tips that have been submitted, tipsters should rest assured that the FBI is working diligently behind the scenes to follow all investigative leads, to verify tips from the public and bring these criminals to justice, said the FBI in a statement to HuffPost. Members of the public, the FBI statement said, have provided tremendous assistance to this investigation, and we are asking for continued help in identifying other individuals for their role in the violence at the U.S. Capitol. While the term sedition hunters continues to pop up in the FBI's affidavits, the full impact of their work often flies under the radar. Take the network's efforts to publicize images of wanted suspects. The FBI's Capitol Violence Wanted page, which now has featured images of more than 410 suspects, has evolved past the PDF compilations the Bureau was posting in the immediate aftermath of January 6th, but the websites and easily shareable social media cards generated by sedition hunters, which aren't subject to the FBI's constraints, often feature better images, more direct evidence of violence, and catchy nicknames that can generate social media discussion. Often, witnesses have contacted the FBI about someone they know, not because they saw something on the FBI's website or social media accounts, but because they saw info generated by sedition hunters. The FBI has long generated nicknames to increase publicity and get tips from the public, particularly for bank robbers. So far, they've refrained from doing so in the Capitol manhunt. Republican trust in the FBI, by the way, has plummeted even before the Bureau started arresting hundreds of Trump supporters and plastering images of MAGA-hatted assailants on its website. And nicknames poking fun at Trump-loving rioters probably aren't going to build any bridges. Sedition hunters have no such qualms, however, and are happy to step into the void. And I guess that's exactly what they've done. We'll try one more bit of info before we close out for the day. A sleuth who goes by Erica started working on hashtags after she'd begun her sedition hunting by watching video recordings of the violent attacks on police and reporters at the Capitol. That can be a disturbing exercise, she said, and some sleuths will only watch videos with the sound off. The reality is that people did terrible, unprecedented things, and there's a deep responsibility in trying to hold them accountable. She said generating hashtags, Erica found, was a welcome break. It's hard and depressing to watch these videos. These hashtags, if they're funny, it helps add a bit of levity. There are many more stories and quite a lot more left to this very interesting story that will tell you the tales of individual sedition hunters, and I think it's worth your time. We just don't have any more. So I'll refer you to it and put it in the roundup for Scott to put in the summary. Just before I close things out and hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, I will note for the record this still, I guess, breaking news. The husband of Missouri representative dies after battle with COVID-19. I guess, is she a state representative in Michigan, or I'm sorry, in Missouri. Sarah Walsh of Ashland, a Republican, tweeted on Thursday morning that her husband, Steve Walsh, has died after the couple both were diagnosed with COVID-19 earlier this month. Steve apparently working for a member of Congress as a press secretary. But it seems, I guess she's retiring because Sarah seems interested in the seat. That seems uncomfortable.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Just cram this in. He was working as press secretary for United States Representative Vicky Hartzler. I don't know what her status is, but apparently Sarah is running for Hartzler's 4th District congressional seat, which might be uncomfortable at home. I don't know. Well, we'll examine it perhaps more in the future. Now, stay tuned for Justice next.